I've seen sellers feel blindsided, by something in due diligence, and it's so painful. It's painful for me to watch. It has to be infinitely painful for them to go through. And I just want to do anything that I can to help alleviate that. And I think that power comes from knowledge. If we can demystify what the due diligence process is and what to expect during that, then no one feels blindsided. The transition goes more smoothly for everybody involved. So when I'm coaching clients, that's the lens I take. I try to peel back the curtain to give them kind of the inside scoop into the buyer's mind, what a buyer's looking for, and proceed from there.
Heather, talk a bit about your background. What did you do prior to launching this business and seeking out to be a business owner yourself?
Prior to stepping into business ownership and working on being a buyer, I was in the pharmaceutical industry doing drug discovery. So my husband is actually in pharma too. He and I are in the business buying endeavor together. So he's actually in pharma as well. He's on the later end, the patient advocacy end. It's interesting. The pharmaceutical industry is very volatile. And I've had multiple layoffs in my time in pharma. And of course, with my husband being in pharma as well, he's not immune to it either. And a couple years ago, he started to think like, we really need a different, either an additional income stream or a different income stream to kind of hedge our, bet against pharma laying one of us off again. So that's when he started looking around. He stumbled across someone who was teaching people how to buy businesses. And he's like, I think this is a really like great opportunity for us. So again, at the time we both had jobs and we were just looking at it as like another income stream. So the timing was actually perfect. I had just gotten the company that I was working at the time had just gotten bought out by bigger pharma. And so we got cashed out a whole bunch of, money for our stocks and stuff. And I love this story. It makes me laugh so much because I think we got paid out on a Friday. And by the time I got back to work on Monday, the parking lot was like full of Teslas. And so, everyone had gone out and spent their money, hopefully not all of it, but some of their money. And it really drove home, underscored the idea that like when you spend cash, that's it, right? Like the cash is gone. So it just reinforced the idea even more. Like, let's look at something else. And this, buying a small business seemed like the right way to go.
Amazing. And how long ago was that?
That was about 2.5 years ago. So, about a year after the acquisition, I actually did get laid off again. So, thank goodness we had already like started on this endeavor because by then, I had been kind of doing it part-time, but by then at least I like had my foot more in the water. I knew a little bit more about what I was doing. And when that happened, it just made sense to go full-time looking full-time for a business.
So, talk about that process. What have you looked at and why?
We say that we're mostly industry agnostic. We're pretty much open to anything, although we do have some caveats. Sometimes it's easier to talk about like what we're not looking for. So we're not looking for things like restaurants or super retail heavy businesses. We're really more focused on service-based businesses. And to further our criteria, we're looking for established, profitable service-based businesses. And then, of course, our geography, our number one pick is to stay here in San Diego. We're San Diego locals as well. So that's really like kind of what we started with. When we stepped into our business, we're a part of a business buying community. That's how we learned how to do all of this. And that's one of the first things that we're taught is to really look at, they call it our deal box. So what is it that you're looking for? When we don't have focus, we're way more apt to be pulled in like every single direction. And honestly, even when you do have a good a good deal box, you're still kind of getting shiny object syndrome, but it helps, right? It helps to kind of keep the focus, keep you narrowed in on what you're looking for, and hopefully, speed up the process in finding what it is someone's looking for as well.
So, Heather, through this process, you have learned a lot about buying a business, so much so that you've turned around and built a business helping other people
Yeah.
exit their business, hence why I have you on Women Who Exit. So, you've built some tools of your own to help people prep their company for exit. Talk about some of the things that you help folks with in building their exit.
I've become really passionate about helping founders and sellers because looking at all these businesses and being through the due diligence process so many times really highlighted a gap. And the gap is that founders are fantastic at their business, right? Like they know that thing inside and out. They are the experts in their business. But most often, they've never sold a business before. So they're not experts in that process, right? And what I ended up noticing is that oftentimes sellers were feeling kind of blindsided by what they were being asked for in due diligence, even if they were working with a broker. And once I started to see this pattern developing, I was like, oh man, I really want to step in. I really want to help folks feel more comfortable with the process. Because when you don't know what to expect, a buyer's questions can feel like judgy, they can feel really personal, and it's not about that at all. The due diligence process is a neutral process that just affords the buyer an opportunity to look more deeply into the workings of the business, the financials, the operations, the legal, like all of it, right? Just to get a better understanding of what it is they're actually buying. So that's why I really wanted to, just help educate and fill that gap and help founders and sellers feel more comfortable with the process.
I love that because I think what a lot of folks do is they go straight away to turn to business brokers, and brokers have one goal, which is to sell your business as they should, just like a real estate broker would. They have one goal is to sell the house, and they
Mhm.
might suggest slapping a coat of paint on or a bit of carpet or, whatever it might be, but they're in a, like, let's get this going. And it takes sometimes years to prep a business for sale. And so, what I'm hearing you say is you're somebody that someone can consult with to get more than just, a coat of paint on a business. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things I say is it's never too early to start thinking about your exit. Even if you're nowhere near or not at all thinking about selling, you can still implement some of the things that a buyer would look for through the due diligence process now. And what's really cool about that is it does two things. One, it creates optionality. So if someday you do decide you want to sell, you're already set up for it. And the other thing is, it actually helps to build and create a healthier business today. You're going through all of the different parts of your business, and you're just bolstering that up. So, yeah, you mentioned a timeline. Really, buyers are looking for at least 3 to 5 years of financials. So that's kind of like a good timeline to think about as well if you're even starting to consider possibly selling your business. But yeah, sometimes it does take a little while to do things like clean up the books if you haven't hired a bookkeeper, or if you're, running a lot of personal expenses through the business. That's an opportunity to kind of clean up. That 3 to 5 year mark is like a really good place to start looking for that.
Because I know you've looked at a lot of businesses to purchase, and you've walked away from a lot of deals. What have been the red flags that you have seen in some of those deals that you've walked away without naming names, of course?
Yes, of course, of course.
Yes.
So the two, probably three top reasons why we've walked away are one, the financials. The books just weren't clean. Now there are companies that can help with that. They can run what's called a quality of earnings and they can recast the books. It's very expensive.
Explain that a little more for our viewers that maybe
Yeah,
haven't heard that term, if you would.
yeah, absolutely. So basically, these are financial experts, they're CPAs. They basically do a forensic audit of the books of a business. And if are either books that aren't there or they're very messy, they can go through, and it's a very painstaking process, but they can go through and match up invoices to the bank accounts and what books might exist. And then they can recreate P&Ls, balance sheets, and all those kinds of financial documents from basically um, historical movement of money through the business. So that's number one. We actually looked at a business that I loved. I wanted this business so badly. But unfortunately, because the owner was keeping his own books, he had made a very big mistake in the books. And what we thought was the profitability of the business or the cash flow of the business was actually not. It was a material find. So unfortunately, we had to step away from that one. I'd say two other areas that buyers look at, and actually why we walked away from a couple of deals too, is key person risk. So key woman, key man, key person. Basically, a lot of times what can happen is the founder, they're busy building their business, running their business, growing their business. And a lot of times it's the founder, but sometimes it can be someone else on the team who's this key person. And basically, key person is just a lot of institutional knowledge is stored inside this person. They might be the one who holds all of the relationships in the business. They might be doing the key tasks of the business or making vital decisions. So if that person were to step away and not be involved in the business anymore, there would be a huge gap that would be next to impossible to fill. And then the third one is customer concentration. And this is a big one that the banks will look at too. If there's a lot of revenue coming from one customer or even one customer group, depending on if you have like contracts or something in your business, that can be kind of a red flag, especially like I said, for the banks. So I would really encourage founders to start diversifying, getting a nice wide, diverse customer base. You want your revenue to be about 20%, like no more than 20% for one customer.
So, how do you advise when someone engages you to help them prep for exit on that number two, which is this institutional knowledge? Things are in my brain, how to be
Yeah.
not, beyond the obvious, which is just get everything out of the brain. So, not to be the key man or key woman in this case. What are your
Yes.
recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is when you do something, if you do a particular task more than 3 times in your business, that needs to be a process. So start systematizing anything that can be systematized, start writing things down, and it can be little. Like I really like to coach my sellers and founders, tiny changes. We don't need to tackle the entire business from top to bottom tonight. Like, let's chunk this out little bits at a time, make it easy to digest. You're busy running your business as it is, but start to find ways to build it into your process, even like your daily process, right? So you can make little notes to yourself, you can make voice memos, whatever. Loom is becoming like a really popular platform. You can make videos, like short videos using Loom. So these are the kinds of things I highly encourage. Look through the business. You can see like where are you doing the 3 things I mentioned earlier, the tasks, where are you making vital decisions, or where are you holding the relationships and you're the only one, right? So another way you might handle this is if you have a team. Some people don't. Some people are solopreneurs, which means this is even more valuable for them to get it out of their head and onto paper, right? But for folks who have a team, you can start identifying people on your team who are able to take some of these things off of your plate. So, can you delegate a task or a relationship, to somebody else on your team and start to kind of diversify that as well, right? Just like we were talking about diversifying your client list, You want to diversify the client, or excuse me, the knowledge in your head to folks on your team as well.
Heather, I know you built a tool that folks can download super reasonably. That's a great place to start. Talk about that tool.
It's called the Due Diligence Readiness Booklet. I really tried to put a lot of value into it. So it's about 35 pages and it goes through what I call the 7 pillars of due diligence. So it basically breaks down the sections of a business into 7 different categories. And then it gives the insight of the buyer's perspective into each one of these 7 categories. And some of those categories include like the financials and the operations and the customers, things we've already been talking about today.
So it's really a blueprint, would you call it?
Yeah, it is kind of a blueprint. It has some things in there like red flags to look for, and then how can you fix it? Kind of like what we were talking about before. If someone's a key person, like that's a risk, but then how do I actually fix that, right? Like it doesn't really do as much good if I just know what the problem is. Like help me fix it too. So I have some things in there as well for some fixes to what some of the red flags are. And then if someone wants to engage further, like, it's one thing to have a tool and to read through it, but it's another thing to have personalized advice on your business because every business is a little bit different. And, everybody needs a little bit of extra help in maybe one category or another. And then that's where folks can engage with me to actually have the personalized consultations. And we would meet on Zoom and go through it together. Yeah, for just $27, you can download the booklet off of our website.
I have heard folks say that if you want to sell your business, you should be starting even 3 to 5 years in advance, thinking ahead. I've heard people
Mhm.
even say, even further on that thread, that you should start a business from day one, thinking about selling the business in so
Okay.
that you are building your books in that manner. In complete separation of personal and business, always, always,
Yeah.
always. And I teach a lot of folks how to start businesses, and that is a soapbox I start on and die on.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know if you were into punk music back in the day, but there was a
Still
band called
am.
there was a band called The Offspring, and
Yes, ma'am. One of my favorites.
there was a song called "You Gotta Keep It Separated,"
Hmm.
and I always joke with my students in my launch academy. I sing that riff from the song, and they come up to me like years later, and they're like, "I still remember the riff from that song. Keep it separated." So start with that in mind, especially from a banking and a money perspective, because commingling can kill you in so
Yeah.
many ways, right? Opens you up to so much liability and,
Yeah.
just so many things go wrong with that. But your point being, just the systemization of the business, getting things out of your head and onto paper, so to speak,
Hmm.
although nothing's on paper anymore, but, digitally, obviously. So really, starting a business day one, thinking about when am I going to sell this, not if I'm going to sell this, but when I'm going to sell this. And if
Yeah.
for whatever reason you start a business without that mindset, at whatever point you realize you think someday you might want to sell, like thinking ahead at least 3 years and starting to plan for it. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you nailed it. I mean, I've been talking to some folks who are thinking about starting businesses, and I literally told them that start with the end in mind. Like, if you can start then, it's perfect. And, what do they say about trees? The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The second best time to plant one is right now. So, same thing. If when you're starting your business, if you're starting it right now, think about it with the end in mind. If you are, a decade into your business, but that you just got the thought, great. You've found the second best time, start thinking about it now. I've seen sellers feel blindsided, by something in due diligence, and it's so painful. It's painful for me to watch. It has to be infinitely painful for them to go through. And I just want to do anything that I can to help alleviate that. And I think that power comes from knowledge. If we can demystify what the due diligence process is and what to expect during that, then no one feels blindsided. The transition goes more smoothly for everybody involved. So when I'm coaching clients, that's the lens I take. I try to peel back the curtain to give them kind of the inside scoop into the buyer's mind, what a buyer's looking for, and proceed from there.
Well, I think that's important you say that, Heather, because you've been through this process as a potential buyer quite a few times now.
Yeah.
And so you can give that advice because you've been in that seat,
Yeah.
truly.
Yeah.
Like, and are currently still in that seat because
Yes.
you're actively looking to buy a business.
Yep, we sure are.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Heather, if folks want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, the best place is my website. It's hcwbizadvisors.com. And then you can also reach me on LinkedIn. It's Heather Williams 731.